Katie, Chris, always good to see you. Thanks for being on the broadcast.
My pleasure.
We've known each other for a number of years and kind of, shared battle secrets, in our schools. You have sold your school and just super successful in the industry as a music school owner. And so I was hoping that maybe we could chat a little bit about your journey and, maybe start with like how did you get into this industry to begin with, and maybe a little bit about some of your success secrets. So
Sure.
yeah, let's jump in. So tell me a little bit about like the beginning of your journey.
Yeah. So I think, like a lot of music school owners, I was a musician first, and for me, a vocalist specifically. I moved from Los Angeles, which is where I'm from, to a sweet town here in Louisiana, Lafayette, to get married, and ended up getting asked to teach for a talent agency for some young vocalists that were preparing to do a talent expo. And I was like, well, sure, I'll give it a shot, kind of re-entering a new city and trying to figure out what was next in my musical career. Fell in love with it. And it really, snowballed. I mean, it was a 10-year journey from the start of, teaching this little small group of students to where we ended up. But the climb was organic. I like to call it a climb because it really did feel like that,
Mm,
like it does for most entrepreneurs or studio owners.
yeah, well, I think that is a good way of putting it, because the thing with the growth that with schools is like you grow and then you give some up and then you grow and then you give. So it's kind of like this, you know,
Mhm.
this up and down, but it's like riding that wave. But yeah, so very much like a climb. So,
Mhm.
okay, so you were from LA
Mhm.
and you came over, you kind of got this thing started. What was like, after you kind of were teaching a little bit, where was that point where you just sort of like took the leap and like, okay, I'm gonna run my own studio?
Yeah. So the first year, I guess, of teaching in this little talent agency, that was my side hustle.
Yeah.
And I was actually working as a marketing director for a doctor, which is interesting connection to what skills are needed to be successful in a music school. But his daughter was a student. He came to the first show, and it was an end of year, spring concert. And he pulled me aside and he goes, wow, you have something really special that our community needs. I'm going to help you find a space to run your business. And I said, what? Okay. So we drove around one day. We found a little space to lease. And really, that's what started the Music Box, is this office space that had 3 lesson rooms, but it was just me and 30 students at that time. And it really, became a reality that this was a legitimate business when I, signed my first lease. And in our first 3 years in that location, we maxed out the space. We grew from 30 students to 100 students. I had about 5 teachers at that time. And then each progression of growth, and I guess for us specifically, we would, grow out of a space and move into the next at different stages. Um, the business got more and more refined.
Hmm. Well, yeah, and I think when a student, I'm curious to hear about this, right? Because like you started out and this is where we all start out. It was
Mhm.
just you,
Yep.
and you had your own students, right? And then of course, when you sign a lease, anybody who's ever signed a lease knows that's a scary thing to do, right? Like
Yeah.
it's very scary. It's different than like buying a house, right? You buy a
Mhm.
house, you sign on a mortgage. For some reason, that's different, right? You live there, but
Yeah.
when you sign a lease, it's like that's a big deal. So you sign this lease, you have 30 students, it's
Mhm.
just you teaching.
Mhm.
Like when did you decide like, hey, I need to bring on some other teachers? Was that like right away or did
It was probably within like the second year. So we're like halfway through this
okay.
year 2 or first official first year as our own little business, or my own little business. People started asking, hey, we'd love to learn guitar here too. And like, I see you have these rooms. Do you know anybody? And then it was like, oh, okay, well, this has actually got legs. Like, I'm going to start recruiting. Right. And so when
Mm,
I reference back to that climb, I think a lot of young um, especially our industry. It's like the E-Myth book, the entrepreneurial myth book is amazing. If you haven't read it yet,
Right.
read it.
Yeah.
But there are so many things that I think, the service provider that turns their passion into a business learns the hard way because of growth, right?
Right.
And yeah, at that stage, I'm like, okay, I'm going to learn how to recruit. And luckily, I'm a people person, so that was wonderful. And my musical background was really unique to the area that I'm in now. So I was able to kind of use that to move things along a little bit more quickly, I think, for marketing myself as a teacher, but also marketing the school to other prospective teachers.
Did you have to overcome some fear of like, well, now I'm marketing to these students? Like, it's one thing to market for yourself and because you know your own ability, right?
Yes,
So like now all of a sudden you're marketing for some other person that maybe you know a little bit about them, but really you don't know how good of a teacher they are, right?
right.
So did you have to kind of get over that?
Yes, yes, and like, just have faith and dive in a little bit and hope that you know, that I didn't have any blinders, or that my intuition was right for the people that I was hiring. And early on, I think, those first initial couple of hires, they're like, your babies. It's crazy. We have the first guitar teacher that was ever hired at the Music Box is still there. I
That's so
mean, it's
interesting.
amazing. But you have a really special bond while you're building something like that with other people, I've noticed, just in the years of experience, that,
Hmm.
when you believe in something so much and you attract the right type of person to join your team, it's a pretty incredible experience.
Would you say that, like, what would you tell somebody who's maybe they're in that stage, right? 30 students, 40 students, they're teaching on their own and they realize the only way to really grow and scale is to hire teachers. So it's like you said it, you became a recruiter, right?
Yeah,
So you're a teacher and a business owner, but now you're also a recruiter, right? So
right.
putting on a new hat.
Yes.
What advice would you give somebody who's just starting in that journey where it's like, how do I become a recruiter? What if I'm not a people person? What if I don't have all these contacts in the music community? Like, what's a good approach mentally to really get into that?
Yes, if I could have like found the resources that I found around year 5 in my career, with the Music Box at year 1, I think it would have been an easier process. So just advice as far as like, what would I tell someone that's entering that next stage? If you have an opportunity to become or to be coached by an expert, somebody that's done this already, spend the money. Don't be
Yeah.
afraid to invest in learning from someone that has done this before you. I think it will eliminate a lot of the question mark of, how do I do this? What's the right, employment standards, all of the things that come with creating and building a team. It's not just attracting and recruiting the talent to join you on your mission. It's making sure that you're bringing them in and taking care of them the way that they need to be taken care of and all of that. Um, so yeah, I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying is get help.
Yes,
Go come alongside somebody
yes,
that's done it before. Join a group of people
yes.
that can encourage you, right? That are also in your industry. I 100% agree
And
with that
don't be
because it is.
afraid, yeah, don't be afraid to say, "I don't know how to do this." And I think a lot
Mhm.
of entrepreneurs or, music school owners, they're leaders. Like I know that. I don't think that, I know that. And sometimes leaders have a hard time like being led in areas that they have blind spots in. I know
Mm.
myself, it's like, I could do this until you can't.
Yeah. Yep.
Or until you're like, oh, I hit a speed bump and I need a little bit of help here. So I think that that's a resource that there's plentiful now. And it's
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of resources that people can access. But kind of to get a little more nuanced with this, right? So, like, if you have somebody who's wanting to reach out into like a community and get, like, I mean, so one way, maybe one answer to that would be ads, right? Like running ads for teachers. The
mhm,
hard thing about that is you really don't know who those people are. And so
yeah,
then the follow-up to that is, okay, well, you have to take them through an interview process.
right.
Okay, well, so what does that interview process actually look like? And if
Mhm.
you've never done that before, you kind of have to just build it,
Wing it.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, wing it. Yeah. Which is what we all did at the beginning, right? We're
Yeah.
all just like trying to figure this stuff out. So I think the wisdom to your point of saying, "Hey, don't just reinvent the wheel. Ask some people who have gone before you
Correct.
and how they do it. Like, what is their hiring process? Because it really should be a process of hiring,
System.
not just a yeah, exactly, yeah,
Mhm.
system. So
Yes.
you kind of had to figure that out.
Yes, and, one other piece of advice is, like, as you're, developing those systems or receiving, coaching in those systems, to just make sure that you have, great records of those so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you come up to this opportunity in your business. Because as we know, in the music academy industry, like, your young creative professionals, like, they come and they go, and sometimes you have to replace them, and to be
Right.
able to continually do that successfully, it's system based, repetitive.
I tell my manager, who's actually my director now, but I tell her every time she's doing a new task that she hasn't done before, whether that's like literally creating an inventory system for some kind of new t-shirts that we have or whatever it is, I tell her record on video what you're doing and
Yes,
then add that to
the
a
manual.
file.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that way when you're not here anymore because, I mean, I'm not, but I mean, it's just the idea being let's create a system. Let's make it so that even somebody in your absence could do the exact same thing that you're doing. There's a
Yes,
lot of value in that.
absolutely, absolutely.
And you mentioned the Myth, which is a great guidebook for getting into that mindset of like, yeah,
Mhm.
you're not gonna always be the technician. In other words, you're not always gonna be the one doing the thing that you're selling to your customers.
Right.
And so you have to, it has to be duplicatable. So okay, so you started hiring teachers, right? You
Mhm,
started growing. You filled out the space
mhm.
pretty quickly, which is
Yeah.
amazing. What happened next?
Yeah, so we attracted another opportunity. At that stage, we had a student whose, the parents had a daughter who was just moving back from Los Angeles that was a dancer, and her sister was a well-known dance studio teacher locally, and they were going to open a new studio in this 11,000 square foot performing arts complex, and they wanted to tailor the space to include the music box. We needed more space. It was a beautiful way for me to get more immersed in this new community. And we took the leap of faith. And in that move, we acquired 5 lesson rooms. We were 3 at the time. We were in that location for, I think it was 3 or 4 years. I can't remember now. Maybe it was 4 years. And over
Wow.
that duration, we ended up moving into empty rooms and ended up growing into 7 lesson rooms in that location.
Wow.
So I think the unique opportunity there was for us to become a part of a local family community and really reach a small town differently,
Mhm.
from a marketing standpoint. So, and then just for the uniqueness of being in the same space with a dance academy and kind of growing with them was really neat.
Yeah, well, the association is it makes sense because you're marketing essentially to the same
Mhm.
people, so there's a lot of cross promoting that can happen there.
Yeah.
And proximity matters, right? Like
Yes.
proximity to where these people already taking dance lessons, and oh, there's music school.
Oh, my brother can take guitar at the same time, or, I can
Right.
jump into a voice lesson after ballet or whatnot.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, so what a great partnership and opportunity for expansion and for growth. And that's one of the things I've always admired about you, Katie, is you've always thought things through very carefully and
Mhm.
like just like how can I maximize this and
Mhm.
still maintain the amazing customer service and the experience that I can give my students each week.
Thank you.
And so those are important things. And this is really where I want to get to with you is you you guys grew very organically. You didn't have this big, massive marketing budget where you were just blasting everybody.
Mhm.
You used a lot of these more subtle skills of creating a lot of beauty in your school, making the space a pleasant space to be, um, And I think this is very instructive for all of us music school owners, like when we're thinking about the nuance
Mhm.
of how to make it a really cool place, right? How to make our schools really cool and make the customers, the prospects want to take lessons here. Um, so can you talk a little bit about that? Like even from the very beginning when you were smaller, what were some of the little nuanced details that you would would create in your space to make it really special for your students?
Yeah, yeah. So, experience is very important to me. I, I guess, as the developing the brand, I always wanted to create a space that made people feel special, and that they were excited to go to and proud to be a part of. And that
Mm,
really, I guess, just creatively for me, like the aesthetic experience was something that
mhm,
just excited me about developing the Music Box brand. But I mean, when we were just in our brand new location, very small details such as having fresh flowers in the lobby. I mean, a lot of people don't think to do that. But it's like these little touches. There's another book. I believe it's called It's My Pleasure. It's the Chick-fil-A philosophy on, the
okay.
experience that they create. There was a portion of that book that talked about like the driving up to the business, and the person that worked at Chick-fil-A got off the interstate and noticed that there was trash at the exit. So he'd get out of the car and he'd pick up the trash to make sure that literally driving off the interstate to their parking lot, it was a lovely experience. And then
Wow.
further develop that inside. And something about that to me, I think coming from a big city and being in a small town, I wanted to remind people how special music, culture, and experience is and how it makes you feel. So
Mm,
for people to walk into a space and feel like glamorous and like they belong to something unique and exciting.
mm.
The
I love that. Man, I love that. And I love that Chick-fil-A example. How like talk about going
extra
way above and beyond and
yeah.
thinking, yeah, and just like thinking about a customer's experience. That's an
Mhm,
interesting thing to think about, right? Like
mhm,
like when somebody drives up, and I remember doing this when we opened up our third location, it was like I actually sat in the parking lot one night and it was before we opened, and I just was sitting there just thinking, what would it be like to drive up to
mhm,
this location, and what am I going to look at, what am I going to see, what am I going to smell,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
What am I going to interact with, like, non-verbally,
mhm.
right? And that's really interesting. So like, okay, so you talked about the fresh flowers, I love that, although I
Yeah.
am curious, fresh flowers, how did you systematize that?
And just like once a week, I'd pick them up.
Okay, all
Yeah,
right.
and so the fun thing was when we got to our 3rd location, or not 3rd quantity, 3rd actual, we needed to grow into our
You
3rd store.
moved, yeah, to the, yeah,
We bought the real estate, which was a huge milestone for,
yep,
music school owner, and I got to design the entire interior of the space. And when we were working through that, this experience for me just became, I guess, magnified
yeah.
tenfold. I have administrators that, have moved on from the company that they'll say, "Oh, Katie, I I see a fingerprint on a glass now." And I say, "I wonder how that would make the customer feel about our how we handle our business." And it's true. It's like your client is the mom and dad that are paying tuition, right? Your student, is the other experience. So for me, you've got 2 experiences to cultivate. The student experience, which most music academy owners, that's really organic, like the obvious, it's the result of the child's confidence or the adult's confidence in growing in their musicality. But another important side of it for me was like, I want the mom to come in here and like smell a beautiful candle, have like a lo-fi instrumental beat, be able to see their child on the camera, but like sit down and like check her emails for 5 minutes and feel calm.
Mm. I
um,
love that. I love that. Like
yeah.
just checking those things off and being like,
Mhm.
how can I create each one of those things?
That experience, yes. Yeah. So,
Wow.
and it keeps them coming back because 'cause they're like, "Oh, this is nice for me too. My child's being musically enriched. They're engaged and happy. You hope.
Right,
And then
right, yeah.
they're having an opportunity to feel like they're also being treated, to a nice experience. You know.
Yeah, yeah. So and I want to get to this too. You talked about finally you guys landed in this real estate that you bought,
Mhm.
and that's where your final spot was for your
Yes.
music tour before you ended up selling it, the
Yes.
business. But you designed it and you thought about all of those things, all of those experiences.
Mhm.
Um, so I want to ask you about where does experience and practicality kind of overlap, right? Like, so at
Yeah.
some point, somebody could say, like, you could really go over the top with
Mhm.
experience, right? And to where it doesn't become very practical, like we're actually losing money now, you know.
Oh, on design and
And
aesthetic?
so, like, yeah, aesthetics, design, and just all kind of going that over the top. Like when people walk into your school, you want them to feel like it's just absolutely amazing, right? You want
Right.
that experience to be absolutely great. And so it's kind of like, was there a point at which you had to kind of like you had to think about the practical aspect of, okay, we're charging X number of dollars for students to come in and take lessons with us each week. And but I also want to create this amazing oasis for moms and parents and all of that.
Mhm.
So like just bringing those two together
Mhm.
and making your school profitable.
Yeah.
Because the other thing that I found really, really amazing about your school is that you were really profitable. Like
Mhm.
your school was super profitable. And so like it's just a fascinating case study for me to look at, because you
Yeah.
you really did bring the amazing experience and kind of that over the top, right, customer service and profitability. A lot of times people do not think those can go hand in hand.
Yeah, they can. They can. It's such an interesting question. I hope I can answer it clearly for you. So for us, and I guess me as the leader of the music box, thoughtful, slow, and steady were really my process for expansion at every step. But we also did grow very organically. So things were calculated. Each risk was a calculated risk, right? So when
Mm,
you move from, your first location to your second location, and you now need to double in size to be at the same capacity, you're not going to double your rent, if that makes sense.
right.
They're not the same. So as you're scaling, your expenses should start to stabilize for the most part. And that's what it was like in our experience. So as we outgrew our second location and the opportunity to buy, we actually had a decrease in expenses because of the real estate deal that we were able to secure. Even though it was a much larger space, a much nicer space, the direction of the lease terms as they were being renewed were less favorable than me taking the risk and buying a new location. And I think with us investing in, the glamorous items, I think I'd be curious to do an analysis of a new build out compared to mine, and like furniture
Mm,
expenses versus, ours versus somebody else's, and just to kind of break it down and say, well, how much did you spend on lobby chairs?
right.
Because I don't think we went out of extreme as far as on the budget. It's just like the style was a little bit more curated,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. Um, but we did take advantage, or I took advantage of short-term financing opportunities. So it was like, okay, I wanted all new furniture in our new location for the lobby,
Hmm.
classroom desks and chairs. And so I would do a short-term, no interest financing for a
Hmm.
year,
Yeah.
to do the short-term risk, but get the finish that I really wanted.
Mm.
So they were really calculated and thoughtful investments that didn't break the bank.
Yeah, yeah. So like when it came to buying furniture and
Mhm,
buying decor and all of
mhm.
that, did you have a budget that you were working from? Or was it more, like you said, these short-term financing opportunities where it's
Yes.
like, I has to look like this and we'll, we'll figure out how to pay it as we go kind
Yeah,
of a thing.
no, I definitely had a budget. Like I had a certain amount of discretionary income that I'm like, I would really love to put this into this space and, for a year, reduce the cash flow by X amount, you know?
Yeah.
I'm happy to do this because what I know was going to happen was we were going to grow and that was going to not even matter by the time we were in the new location. And that's exactly what happened.
And I think that's really instructive for somebody to know that's like
Mhm.
in this spot where they're like, I really want, like, I hear what Katie's saying, and I want it to be just like that. And it can be very easy for somebody to slip into, well, I'm just going to spend whatever I spend, and
Oh,
and
yeah.
then you just grow into it because I know
Mhm.
it's going to be amazing. So I think it's really good that you were talking about, like, you actually took a decrease in your pay
Mhm.
for that period of time to
Yes.
accelerate the payoff of these items that you put into
Yes.
your new space.
And it really goes back to that initial, when we've hired our first person, like, had I known I could have invested in a coach at the time, which I just was new to the industry, didn't really have the resources available or know of the resources. But if you're here watching this now and you're at a different stage of growth, invest
Yeah.
in it because calculated investment has a really wonderful outcome most of the time. If you really just think about it, can I take $200 a month out of my pay to, give me a year of coaching that's going to help me bring 50 to 100 new students to my school in a year? Can I,
Right.
spend $500 a month to refurnish my space that I'm moving into this year? Yes. You know what I mean?
Right.
Whatever it would be, but
Yeah, well, I think the last thing people often, and this isn't even just in business, this is like, I think, human nature. Like, the
mhm.
last thing we think of investing in is ourselves,
Yes.
right? And so, like, and I think in business it's exactly the same way. Like, you don't realize how important it is to develop what's going on in your mind and to open your mind up to, like, all these things that you just don't know. Like,
Yeah.
we don't know. Like, if you don't know, you don't know. You don't know what you don't know, right? So it's like, once you open up these ideas and are kind of guided along the path and be like, hey, yeah, I've I've done this before. I can tell you exactly what not to do,
Yeah.
right? And go this direction, go this path. So it's just helpful and it's encouraging to know that you're not alone and that there is a lot of resources out there that can help
Yes.
you. So I'm glad that you brought that up. It's a really good
Mhm.
point.
Yeah.
Um, so once you moved into this space, you had this beautiful, and I saw pictures, and it really was. It's something that should be in a magazine.
Thank you.
It really was incredible. Your eye for design is really something. Um, but you grew. You just kept
Yes.
growing. And
Yes.
and and how did you interact with your competition? Right? We all have competition in our own areas. We have people that where it's like, you see them either down the street. I actually have a competitor that's literally across the street. I can
Oh,
see from my window. I can see
we
them.
had a School of Rock across the street from our second location. That was like, ooh, it was a little scary at first, and then you're like, "Wait,
Yeah.
we're a different flavor."
Yeah. Yeah. So talk about that, right? So, like, how did you interact with competition?
Yeah, so I feel like, every music school owner has a different, like, experience to provide to a client, and you're gonna attract the client that is most aligned with the experience that you offer. That's my personal opinion, that's my experience in my local market. I think there were 3, pretty sizable schools that did private music instruction, just like the Music Box did, and my school, it's like you can see the big city pop vocal vibe in the experience. The
Mm,
School of Rock, I think their leader and founder is like a drummer, and it's like that's the vibe. It's rock and roll. It's super cool. I think there was another school where the founder is a guitarist, and it's like they have a little bit of everything, and they're just a
right.
different experience, right?
Yeah.
So I think where you can maybe not so much interact, but more just focus on how to stand out is to focus on your, like, what's your magic that is different from the other schools in your area? Like, what makes your school magical,
Yeah.
And highlight that, market that way and make sure your branding matches the experience that you create inside of your space.
Well, and the nice thing about that's so true, by the way, it's so true, is that you are the only version of you,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah,
and so nobody can compete with your school in the sense that nobody is doing everything exactly the way you're
right,
doing that.
right,
However, the world out there does not know exactly how you operate unless you tell them,
right,
right?
right,
You know, they're looking at music lessons and they see a competitor that's music lessons. To them, it's the same thing
right,
until you can actually identify. So that, yeah, so that really comes in down to marketing, but it's not marketing against somebody else. It's really marketing to fully define who you are and like what it
exactly,
is that makes you you, like
right.
what's your brand and like and how you operate. So that, yeah, I love that. So
Yeah,
you did that really well.
thank you.
And but so talk about that, like with marketing
Yeah,
and with how did you define your brand
yes.
to totally differentiate yourself from your competitor?
Yes. So I think attention to detail is something that, rings true through the experience that the music box created. And that was a part of our systematic like marketing process.
Mhm.
Pipelines are something that a lot of school owners will use once you get a prospect to kind of initially
Yeah.
they're on set, you send them through the pipeline. And we had a lot of ours automated thanks to Studio Success. Um, with Nick Tucker.
Yeah,
But
hey.
we had, a lot of our, like it was like emails and texts, and there would be like a video tour, so people haven't even stepped foot into the space, but the tone of, the copywriting, the visual experiences that we're able to deliver before we even see them for their first lesson, we would hope that our efforts would show them the difference immediately. If they're calling the competitor and now they're calling us and they're getting like the communication to sign up for lessons, we're hoping that our brand experience is shining through, um, specifically to the ideal client that we want in our school. So,
Yeah. 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 Well, and I like that you talked about automation because
mhm.
that can feel overwhelming for somebody who's
Oh,
like, where do
yes.
I start? You know,
Yes.
how do I do that? So automation, I think, is a big proponent of being able to, or component of being able to um, really do that kind of drip marketing that you're talking about, or the
Yes.
pipeline, getting your message out there. So the attention to detail, like showing people.
Mhm.
One of the things I always like to say is like show people the result of what you're selling, not
Mhm.
necessarily what you're selling, but the
Yeah.
result of it, right? And so
Yes.
happy kids, happy moms,
Yes.
beautiful space. Those are the things that you want to show people.
Yes.
And again, you did that really well. So um, well, is there anything else? Like, what advice would you give to somebody who's just starting out that wants to grow and have create just an amazing experience in this industry as a music school owner? What's the piece of advice you might give them?
I mean, I think the first thing is if you have the passion to do something, to believe in yourself and to let that
Mm,
spark turn into a fire. And to, again, I think just really going back to investing in yourself, investing in your future. And if you see the opportunities to invest in your school, essentially you are investing in yourself because you've created yourself a phenomenal career and you have the opportunity to grow it at any capacity that your heart desires. And don't be afraid to invest in it. I mean, from coaching to, new locations to details to, staffing, whatever it is, at whatever stage of growth you're in.
that's awesome. Well, Katie, thank you so much for being on the show. So much good information as usual. Whenever we have conversations, I learn so much, and I really appreciate you.
Enjoyed it.